Thank you. And thank you. I have two separate readings for you tonight that are related only in the sense that I wrote both of them. There's really no relationship. Well, they are narrative nonfiction and they are immersion reportage, so yes, they are similar, but the topics could not be different. It is Nutcracker season, in case you don't know that. And my most recent book, the book that's out, is called Raising the Bar, and it was a work of immersion reportage where I joined a ballet company and got myself into production of the Nutcracker and toured with the company to learn about ballet and to learn about the underside of ballet, but also just to sort of play with the cliche of you're never too old to, like, fill in the blank, and to raise the bar, you know, because when you put yourself back in a humbling position of being the person who doesn't know anything, I mean, you kind of have to purposely do that in your life as you get older. And it's harder to do because you're so comfortable with where you are. And it's scarier because you don't want to make a fool of yourself. So I just needed to push myself to do that. Anyway, so I did that, and the reading that I'm going to do from that book is actually not about me as a ballerina, but since it is Nutcracker season, is anybody going to see the Nutcracker? Oh, please. Seriously. So I have seen the Nutcracker every year since I was 5 years old. Shame on you. Okay, well then you might not be endlessly curious about the Nutcracker story, but I'm going to make you curious. So you know there's a ballet called the Nutcracker, okay? And you probably know, I mean, it's a very popular ballet full of beautiful costumes, but I'm going to tell you the background of it. The Nutcracker and the Mouse King was a novella written in 1816 by a German author, composer, painter, and government bureaucrat named E.T.A. Hoffmann. A wildly productive but seemingly unhappy man whose intense romantic feelings were reserved for a older married woman and an adolescent girl. He died of paralysis brought on by syphilis and alcohol abuse. So that's the beginning of our lovely Nutcracker story. Right? His stories, considered the first flowering of the horror fantasy genre that Edgar Allan Poe and later H.P. Lovecraft would make famous, focused on supernatural and sinister characters who moved in and out of people's lives, revealing hidden secrets and the more disturbing sides of human nature. His work was grimmer than the Grimms, darker than Poe, weirder than Lovecraft, and hardly the basis for a sweet romantic kid-pleaser of a ballet. So how did this transcendently creepy, and by the way, the preceding pages sketched in the creepiness of this novella, and it really, you know, various psychologists would have a field day reading this novella and then psychologizing the man who wrote it. And it was strange. So how did this transcendently creepy, disturbingly psychological, overly complicated, twisted tale of bloody battles, giant rodents, whispered threats, greed, death, betrayal, and lard eating become the sugary, plummy ballet we know and love? Enter Alexandre Dumas. Dumas was a lavish-living, overfed Frenchman with 40 mistresses, or so he claims, whom a literary contemporary called the most delightfully amusing and egotistical creature on the face of the earth. He was also one of the most prolific and popular French writers of the 19th century, best known for The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. 20 years after Hoffmann's death, Hoffmann is the author of the short story, Dumas adapted The Nutcracker and the Mouse King novella, retitling it Histoire d'une casse-noisette, History of the Nutcracker. Adapted, though, is not really the right word. Sanitized, romanticized, Disneyfied. Those words better describe what the happy-go-lucky Dumas did to the psychologically complex, morally disturbing work of Hoffman. The plot itself was simplified and streamlined. There was a whole weird story within a story, and he just got rid of that whole story within a story. But what really changed the essence of the story was the transformation of what remained of the plot, from dark and scary to fluffy and saccharine. It's as if somebody made a beach read out of The Shining. Dumas' version, unlike many of his adventure tales, was not popular. It languished for 70 years, until a Frenchman who was considered the father of classical Russian ballet, and one of ballet's most influential choreographers, got a hold of it. This guy, whose name was Marius Petita, was one of ballet's most, was the master of ballet at the St. Petersburg Imperial Theaters. And he decided to have Dumas' work made into a ballet, and he commissioned a guy you might know by the name of Tchaikovsky to compose the music. Well, according to ballet legend, the pairing was not a happy one. The two had very differing opinions about how to approach the work. It probably didn't help that Tchaikovsky suffered bouts of depression. Some scholars believe that his sudden death from cholera at age 53 was self-inflicted. Just think about that for a moment. It is also said that the infrequency of the composer's early successes, so Tchaikovsky was not a successful composer before The Nutcracker, made him particularly sensitive to criticism. It turned out that the two didn't have to work with each other because the ballet master was sick, so the other ballet master, the second in command, worked with him. So the ballet was now entitled simply The Nutcracker, and it premiered right before Christmas in 1892 at the St. Petersburg Mariinsky Theater. And it was not a success. The Tsar was enthusiastic. He was at the premiere. And the ballet got what might be called mixed reviews, which is a kind way of saying that most people didn't like it at all. And it became just another part of an ongoing Russian repertoire that was not thought of as a seasonal or holiday production. It didn't happen every year even. And that was the state of this now iconic ballet when in 1919, an extraordinarily talented 15-year-old Russian dancer by the name of Georgy Balanchivadze came to the danced the role of the prince. 24 years later, George Balanchivadze, Balanchine, came to the United States where he became the father of American ballet and the choreographer of his own version of The Nutcracker. See, there's so much more than you thought you'd ever want to know. And I'm getting the feeling more than you actually do want to know, but I'm almost finished. Although the San Francisco Ballet was the first to present a full-length Nutcracker to American audiences in 1944, it was Balanchine's theatrical production performed by the New York City Ballet in 1954 that catapulted the ballet to its current day status. It didn't hurt that the production was televised right before Christmas, and that Balanchine played the part of Drosselmeyer, who's the older man. So that's a long 138 years to be exact, and winding road from creepy, phantasmagoric, pre-Jungian, pre-Freudian tale to a stage full of tutus, toe shoes, snow flurries, and impossibly cute 5-year-olds prancing around as harmless little mice. It is also an extraordinary, perhaps quintessentially American journey from marginal production to not just the single most popular ballet in the world, but also the most heavily, consistently, and I might say mercilessly commercialized and merchandised single production on Earth. One of the things that I did in preparing for this book was I did a transcontinental Nutcracker binge tour right around this time a couple of years ago, and I saw 9 productions in 11 days in different cities around the United States, and they were all different and all interesting. But what was actually most astonishing to me was the merchandise. And I always thought, well, you could buy the little nutcracker tree ornaments, but oh my goodness, you can buy whiskey flasks, you can buy cat dishes, anything that you could possibly stick a nutcracker on, somebody has. So that's Raising the Bar, which is back there, if you're interested. If you want to just get into the Nutcracker spirit, I'm sure there are still some tickets available. Okay, so the next reading is something completely different. It's a book that I'm working on right now that is called A Grip of Time. And it is based on my work at Oregon State Penitentiary, where I run a writers group for lifers. The idea of the group is to use, they do nonfiction writing, is for them to own their own stories. And they all say, I don't want to be remembered for the worst thing I ever did. So the question is, what do you want to be remembered for? And what is your story now, 30 years into being behind bars? So, and it's therapeutic to write. And they are also teaching me how to create a life of meaning in a place designed to rob all meaning from living. So that's what the book is about. And this is the beginning, or I don't know if it's the beginning or not, actually. But it's something. Move to the side, he said, jerking his head to the right. I obeyed. Obeying is what you do when a prison guard tells you to do something. I'd set off the metal detector. The guard, big, fleshy, bored, hardly looked at me. I wasn't a threat. I was barely an annoyance. Someone holding up the line. Step out of the way, he said again. I was moving too slowly, trying to wedge myself between the wall and the guard without touching the guard. I looked at him, thought about saying something. Didn't. I was shoeless, beltless, and jewelry-free. My pockets were empty. I didn't know why I had set off the alarm. And so I stood to the side, silent, awaiting further instructions, looking over my shoulder at a scene that was becoming increasingly familiar to me. The Greyhound bus-style visitors' waiting room with its linoleum floors and its plastic chairs. The dozens of weary young women crowding in, jostling for position, carrying their fitfully sleeping babies, holding on to their squirming toddlers. Like me, they were waiting to be processed. Like me, they were waiting to begin the trek, simultaneously tedious and frightening, through the metal detector, down a long blank corridor, through heavy metal gates that clang behind you, past a checkpoint, through another set of clanging gates, down an even longer corridor, past a second checkpoint, through a third gate, and onto the heavily guarded control floor that sat at the heart of Oregon State Penitentiary. Somewhere along the line, the women and children peeled off to the big, featureless visitors' room. I would walk, accompanied by an officer, 20 feet across the control floor to another gate, up a flight of stairs to the activities floor. The women were there to see their inmate husbands. I was there to meet with my inmate writers. And then just a bit about Oregon State Penitentiary. Anyone visited OSP at all? Oregon State Penitentiary is home to 2,000 men. It's the state's oldest prison, its only maximum security facility, and the site of the state's only death row, where no one has been executed, but there are 27 people on death row. I mean, not no one has ever been executed. No one has been executed for, I think, more than 20 years. It sits invisible behind 25-foot-high concrete perimeter walls, less than a mile and a half from the pretty golden domed state capitol building in the heart of Salem. Inside the walls is a 22-acre self-contained city with the state's largest commercial laundry. Interesting fact. A furniture factory, a metal fabrication shop, a call center, vocational shops, an infirmary, 2 recreation yards, and 4 cell blocks, 3 of them massive Sing Sing-like cages within cages that looked like the setting of every grim prison movie ever made. Parallel rows of barred cells, 40 cells long, 5 tiers high, narrow metal walkways, nothing but concrete and steel. The drive into the prison grounds is as lovely as the prison is not. This is fertile Willamette Valley river bottom land. The penitentiary entrance is landscaped and manicured. There are brilliant green lawns and towering conifers, graceful weeping willows and stately oaks. There are rose bushes and hydrangeas. There are birds, and then there aren't. Up the set of concrete steps and into the main building, a late 19th century edifice that looks like a cross between an asylum and a high school. There is the tired waiting room with vending machines and an old ATM and a long counter for processing visitors and a TSA-style conveyor belt and metal detector overseen by guards like the one who just pulled me aside. I stood, still waiting. I was not new to this. This was my 5th time at OSP, my 5th time through the visitor control checkpoint, and I knew the drill. Show your picture ID at the counter, sign in, check pocket, stash purse in one of the 25-cent lockers that occasionally worked. Queue up and wait your turn to go through. I knew how to dress, show as little skin as possible, wear clothing that was loose enough to not be form-fitting, but not so loose as to look like you might be trying to conceal something. Don't look too feminine, but don't look too butch either. No jeans. The inmates wore jeans. Nothing blue. The inmates all dressed in blue. I'd learned the rules and I followed them. The guard ordered me to check my pockets. Empty. Remove jewelry. Already done. And go through again. I went through again. Again the alarm sounded. His next step was to call over a female guard to pat me down. Or he could just he could take me aside and wand me the way the TSA guys do. A hassle, but either way, I'd be good to go. I was getting antsy. I had my writing group waiting for me upstairs on the activities floor. 8 guys, all members of the Lifers Club, they were decades into their grip of time, which is a prison expression for a whole lot of time, serving either life with, the with being the possibility of parole, or life without, meaning they would die in prison. I'd started working with them a few months back, coming in to run a writing workshop. It was happening in fits and starts. One month I had permission to come in, the next nothing. The idea, which I pitched to a prison education committee, was to offer lifers a chance to write about their lives while offering me a window into their world. I stood there, waiting, eager to get upstairs and start the afternoon workshop. But today the guard wasn't going to let that happen. Maybe he didn't like the way I looked. Maybe he was having a bad day. I don't know. What I know is that he made a spur-of-the-moment choice not to call over the female guard to pat me down and not to wand me. He wasn't going to make it possible for me to get through to the control point. I was frustrated, and I was furious, and I was powerless. And I couldn't let it show. This same guard might be manning the metal detector on my next visit. I didn't want to make an enemy. And all of a sudden I got it. I got a hint of what it was like to live inside these walls. Walking back to the locker to retrieve my stuff, I felt almost queasy with impotence. And I felt a little crazy, the kind of crazy you feel when things that made sense all of a sudden don't. I was in a place that was all about rules, that was dictated and constrained by rules. If you knew the rules and you played by them, everything was predictable and you were okay. Right? Wrong. Because prison is also a place of random acts. Knowing and obeying the rules didn't spare you from the random acts. The rules created the expectation of predictability. On the other hand, anything could happen. You were buffeted coming and going. And you never knew what was going to happen, and you couldn't do a thing about it. It would be more than a month before I would meet the guys again. And I'm going to read you one short scene from several times over. So this is, I don't know how many visits after that. Write about a recent dream, I tell the guys at our next session. It's 7:30 on a Saturday morning, the only time that Stephen, who is the guy who's head of activities, who's taken me under his wing, who's a very interesting fellow, the only time that Stephen could find for me on the activity schedule. It meant waking up at 5 a.m. The drive to the prison from my house takes close to an hour and a half, and there's almost always a jam-up going through the line once I'm there. But if I'm to build something, if I'm to gain the trust of the guys and show Stephen that I can be counted on, and show those in charge that I might be an asset, I have to seize every opportunity presented to me. We meet in our usual place, a cavernous room that must be the size of half a basketball court. An odd space to find in a place where everyone lives in a 6x8 cell. But this part of the prison was built close to 100 years ago, and this floor, now the activities floor, used to be the mess hall. The room is windowless and bare except for one wooden table made in the prison furniture shop and some folding chairs. When we meet face to face, I like to start with an in-class prompt to create an immediate break between whatever they were doing and thinking about before they walked into this big bare room and the 2 hours we have to spend together. They seem to like writing for a 10-minute stretch, and I love to see them intent on the work, hunched over the lined paper I bring in with me, writing longhand. When the time is up, we read aloud. Yes, we. I write and read along with them. It's important that I share too, but I don't expect them to let me into their heads without me letting them into mine. 6 of the guys, there's 8 guys, 6 of the guys are here today, and then I talk about Eric comes in a little late, wound tight. You would have known who these people are by the time you get to this in the book. His face seems thinner and more deeply lined than the last time I saw him. He tells us, his voice so quiet I have to strain to hear him, that he has a visitor coming later today. Michelle, the girlfriend he hasn't seen in 11 years. The girlfriend who has just recently been released from her own term in prison. You earned this visit, buddy, Jan says to him. Eric attempts but fails at a smile. Jan focuses on eating an enormous apple fritter with one hand and writing with the other. Donuts are a perk of the every other month Lifer Club meetings that this writing group is piggybacking on. Michael, usually voluble, is distracted this morning. He starts to write, stops, gets up, leaves, comes back, sits down and writes again. They have, by the way, free movement within a small space, so they can get up and leave the room, but they can't go elsewhere and then come back. I'm just not all here, Michael says. He's preparing for an upcoming meeting of the parole board, which denied him, by the way. Will shifts uncomfortably in his chair and then gets up. I can't do this prompt, he says. I can't write about my dreams. Will is my oldest guy. He's 78. He was a military guy who became a mercenary for like 20 years, a paid mercenary all over the world, shooting people. But then he shot somebody that was not part of what he was being paid to do. I can't do this prompt, he says. I can't write about my dreams. You wouldn't want to know what I dream about. He pauses, not for effect, although the pause has an effect, but I think to figure out if he wants to say anything more. Will is a man of few words, which he carefully chooses. My dreams are too violent, he says. Then he walks out of the room to get another cup of coffee. The guys continue to write. 10 minutes in and they're still intent on their task. I give them another few minutes and then ask who wants to read. Miraculously, Lee volunteers. Lee, who rarely says a word during our sessions. He reads in a quiet, accentless, slightly nasal voice. He dreams of being out on an ice shelf with the wind howling and the sea roiling 50 feet below. His dog, Colt, is his only companion. The dog falls into the sea. And this is Lee talking. I am alone. There's no one to help me save him. He will not last swimming against the waves in this Arctic sea. Lee has his head down, reading. I wonder if he gets that in the world of the dream, he is both the man on the ice shelf and the dog struggling to remain afloat. Lee considers throwing a rope down to try and save Colt, the dog. But I have to go down there, he says, reading slowly. That's the only way. Eric's dream is hard to listen to, so heavily freighted with meaning that it almost collapses from its own weight. He's in a car, spinning out of control. The car is speeding backward. Every time he pumps the brakes, the car seems to go faster. He thinks he's going to crash or kill somebody. He white-knuckles the steering wheel. He breaks out in a sweat. I awake glad I'm still in prison, and that it was a nightmare, and that I harmed no one, he says. This is no run-of-the-mill anxiety dream, and Eric knows it. He's in prison for vehicular homicide, and just in case he forgets it, his dream reminds him. It's a relief to listen to John. Everybody calls him Jan, but it's actually Jan, which I call him. It's a relief to listen to Jan's dream. He dreams about growing a big vegetable garden and canning a harvest in a row of mason jars. I wake up thinking about food and I go to sleep thinking about food, he says. The dream makes him happy and hungry. He doesn't seem conscious of the planting, growing, harvesting metaphor, but he likes the dream. He likes the spaciousness of the landscape. He smiles as he reads what he's written. He tells us again of the grill, which was a short-order takeout joint he ran out of his cell. It's a fascinating piece that he wrote that I hope we're going to submit to the Penn Prison Writers Contest. Prison ingenuity. Eric relates a dream he had just last night. He was walking out in the prison yard when he saw a lone flower in bloom. He picked it and was immediately set upon by a group of Russian prisoners who beat him and yelled at him to get off their turf. Again, it's easy to see the metaphors here, the momentarily hopeful, then almost instantaneously frightening message of the dream. But it's also factual. There used to be flowers and trees in the yard. The guys all remember those days. Every one of my guys has been in at least 25 years. The guys all remember those days, but a past warden had all the landscaping removed. It obscured the vision from the sentry towers. And there is indeed a contingent of Russian prisoners at OSP. Russian mafia, Jan says, commenting on the dream. Everybody nods. After they finish their sentences here, they get deported, he explains, for my benefit. Will, that's my 78-year-old mercenary, Will comes back to the room in time to hear Eric's dream. He sits on the folding chair with his ramrod posture, sipping bad coffee from a styrofoam cup. My first kill was a Russian, he says. We all look over at him. I can see that he's thinking about saying something, but he doesn't. Now we really need a break.